When we don't have the self-management skills to deal with life, we get tossed around like a salad. Now, in my last video, I talked about self-awareness. If you didn't see that, check it out. This is part 2 of emotional intelligence. In this video, we're going to talk about self-management, okay? So what is self-management? Self-management is our ability to recognize our own emotions, to use our awareness of our own emotions, and to stay flexible and direct that behavior positively. This means becoming conscious of our emotional reactions to different people, places, and events in our life. Okay? So in the last video, we talked about what is our self-awareness, how to be self-aware, 3 ways to be self-aware, right? We talked about becoming conscious and aware of our present emotions. We talked about becoming conscious of some of the narratives and stories that we tell ourselves in our mind, some of the limiting beliefs we have. And we also talk about becoming conscious of some of our habits and our routines and even our desires and motivations that we were once unconscious of. So in this video, we're going to talk about once we have that awareness, what can we do about it to become more emotionally intelligent, to handle stress better, to be a better communicator, to work with our feelings, our emotions, to change our limiting beliefs, and to change our habits so we're more successful in all aspects, in all areas of life, okay? So we're gonna get into number 1. Once we used our awareness to become conscious of our present emotions, what do we do next? So for the people who practice self-management, they're the people, whether or not they realize that they practice self-management, these are the people who are usually more empathetic and have more patience to deal with certain people. This means they're people who can put themselves in other people's shoes and see things from their perspective, see things from their point of view. So the first thing we have to realize to practice self-management is to recognize some of our emotions we're feeling in the present moment and deciding what to do next. This means when you recognize that you're at work and you're dealing with a difficult customer or difficult client, and they're trying to start a huge argument and they're raging out and lashing out, this means you're able to learn how to breathe and realize that they're just in a little frenzy where they're letting out their frustration and their pain, which might not even have to do with the problem at hand. This means that you're able to detach yourself from the situation, become aware of how you're reacting, and then respond. Okay, self-management is about becoming conscious of our behavior and emotions and responding. This means when you're dealing with a difficult family member or a difficult person, at school, in the workplace, or at home, you're able to have the empathy to recognize that they're not even aware of how they're feeling, and therefore their emotions are controlling them. Because when you don't recognize your emotions, you're also not going to be able to have the ability to practice self-management. This is why people lash out and they do the things they do. This is why they start fights and they start arguments, because they're being tossed around by their emotions. So if you're practicing self-awareness and self-management, you can get a hold of your emotions and keep your logical side of mind and focus on what's the next best thing to do or to say. This means maybe you take a step back, maybe you separate yourself from the environment and situation, you walk away. You don't entertain their argument, you don't entertain the dialogue that they're having, that they're trying to bring you under. This means giving yourself alone time. One way to practice self-management that I do a lot is I give myself a lot of alone time, and this gives me time to reflect on my emotions, on what I feel, some of my triggers, and it allows me the buffer time, that brief period of time, to change my perspective or understand my perspective and just reflect on the situation and to cool off. Maybe this means having more empathy for the person that you're dealing with, which then allows you to have the patience to deal with them, which means you remain in control. Okay? So become aware of your emotions, but the next thing is finding what's the next best thing to do. So when you go home, you don't take all that stress from work and you don't leash that out on your family or your friends, right? Or your roommate. This means maybe you go home and maybe you journal what happened, or you sit down, you meditate and reflect on it, or you take a walk and you cool off, give yourself time to think and feel your emotions. Now, the second thing to realize, we talked about the last one, is to recognize after we have the awareness that we have certain narratives and we have certain beliefs, we'll be able to recognize what we need to do next with those beliefs. So this means you might journal out some of the beliefs, or this means in the moment when you see particular people or when you have certain situations happen, as soon as that story or that narrative pops up in your mind, you become conscious of it, realize it's not you, but it's just the thoughts and the stories in your head, and maybe recognize that you need to change it, you need to remove it, you need to do whatever you can with it, okay? For my example, right, I noticed that there were some people around me in school, in some of my classes, where I noticed there was someone who did a lot of people pleasing. And I was able to recognize just my communication with them and just being friends with them that, there was someone who I think had this belief where if they weren't always smiling or always giving themselves to people, that people wouldn't validate them, that people wouldn't appreciate them. So when you can become aware of some of these beliefs, you can recognize how it's altering your decision making. So for that person, let's say in your situation, you're doing the same thing, you're doing a lot of people pleasing, and you recognize you have certain beliefs that's causing you to people please, you can recognize, what beliefs do I have? Oh, I have to realize that even though I believe what I believe, and even when I say the things that I want to say, it's not going to hurt me. People are still going to accept me, and even if people don't accept me, it doesn't matter anyway. Okay? So become aware of your beliefs, because it's also influencing the decisions that you're making. So this means you change that belief and you recognize, okay, I need to practice saying no more. Or maybe you recognize that I have to practice setting boundaries. I have to practice saying no to people, and I have to practice setting boundaries so I have my own space. Become aware of the narratives and the stories that you tell yourself. This means at work, you might have a narrative that your boss or your manager or one of your coworkers is an asshole because of something they said or did on the first day that you met them. And you don't even realize that you have this belief. So every time you see them, subconsciously you have this narrative going, and it's influencing your behavior. Maybe you mean mug them, right? You give them a couple, right? Maybe you just try to avoid them. So practicing self-management is recognizing our emotions, giving us time to deal with them. It's also recognizing the narratives and stories and beliefs we have that are serving us, and then what's also not serving us, what's influencing our behavior in a negative way. Now, the third thing to practice. In the last video on self-awareness, we also talked about our habits and our routines. Once you become aware of some of your habits and routines, that's when you can do the reflection work and figure out what's something that you need to do in order to stop what's not serving you. So when you can recognize that you're someone who has a habit of, spending money buying things that you can't afford, you can start to do the work to change that. You can start learning how to budget your money and your earnings so that you stop yourself from hurting your financial situation and limiting your success or your opportunities of the things you actually want to do, or limiting yourself of the opportunity to invest in things that's going to help you even more. That's after you become self-aware of the habits, and now the self-management is changing this. So there's different ways to practice self-management. A lot of it is just giving yourself enough time to think and feel what's going on inside. And there's different mediums of doing that. It could be journaling, or it could be meditation. Maybe it's even, expressing this to other people. So once you recognize all the different components that are going on within you, you can find different ways that work for you and that serve you. So I'll give you this challenge over the next couple of days and weeks. Write down some of the narratives, or maybe if you don't want to write down, you could put it in your phone and bullet point it. Or maybe if you have good memory, you can just contemplate it. As you're going about your daily life for the next week, watch what stories come to mind, narratives, at work, at school, in the household, about different people, about yourself. Watch what emotions arises. Observe your emotions. So when you have that emotional response, observe them. That way you don't fall into reaction. Self-management, we said self-management was being able to manage our emotional reactions. So that happens once we have the awareness. We get a hold of that emotion, and then we pause and we think and we reflect and we work with our perspectives. So try this over time. Let me know how this works for you. And now in the next video, we're going to be talking about social awareness, which is going to deal more with other people rather than, just yourself. This means getting better in your relationships. This means, being more successful at work. So if you want to watch that video, you can go ahead and click here to watch social awareness. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.